The day I took the second job was gray in every sense. Clouds blanketed the London sky, and my thoughts mirrored the gloom as I stood outside a small cafe in Brixton, clutching the apron the manager had just handed me. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from exhaustion. I had just finished a full shift at the charity office where I worked weekdays. It was supposed to be meaningful work helping those in need. Now, I was the one who needed help, or rather, permission to be tired. My husband, Callum, didn't see things that way. "You sit behind a desk all day," he'd said, his voice sharp with judgment. "I'm on my feet constantly. You don't know what real tired feels like." His words stung more than he'd ever admit. I wanted to argue, to explain that emotional exhaustion was just as real. But he always had a comeback, a sharper tone, a louder voice. So instead, I stayed silent. And now here I was beginning shifts at a cafe 4 nights a week, and every Saturday. It was humiliating. Callum had practically pushed me into it. "Maybe if you worked more, you'd understand why I'm too tired to help around the house," he'd muttered one evening, tossing his shoes into the hallway for me to tidy up. At first, I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been too sensitive, too quick to feel overwhelmed. I gave myself a week, just 1 week, to prove I could handle it. But by the 4th evening, I could barely keep my eyes open. My body ached. Still, I didn't dare complain. Callum would only roll his eyes and call me dramatic. On Sunday, my only free day, I cooked, cleaned, and did the laundry while Callum lounged in front of the telly. He'd glance over occasionally, never offering help, always finding something wrong with how I folded the towels or scrubbed the sink. "You're slacking," he said once, barely lifting his eyes from the football match. "If you can't keep up, maybe you're not cut out for this marriage." That night, lying in bed beside a man who no longer saw me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when everything had changed. Callum hadn't always been like this. We used to laugh, plan holidays, dream of a house with a garden. Now I barely recognized him, or myself. But the worst part wasn't the exhaustion or the disrespect. It was the growing sense that this life wasn't mine anymore. I was playing a role in someone else's script, one where my needs didn't matter. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. It began with a suitcase. Callum brought it down from the loft late on a Wednesday evening, thudding it onto the bed with a dramatic grunt. I looked up from the ironing board, sweat clinging to my neck, and asked, "Going somewhere?" He barely looked at me. "Work conference. 2 nights in Manchester. I told you last week." He hadn't. But correcting Callum only led to long silences and clipped replies. So I nodded and asked if he needed help packing. He shrugged, already halfway through tossing shirts and socks into the open case. Later, as I folded his tie properly and added a pair of neatly polished shoes, something strange flickered in his expression. He muttered a quick thanks and went back to scrolling his phone. I caught a glimpse of a name on the screen. Alicia Orangeheart. I said nothing. I wasn't the jealous type. Not really. But that tiny orange heart lingered in my thoughts longer than I cared to admit. The morning he left, I woke early to make him breakfast. He was rushing, barely touching the eggs I'd made. As he grabbed his coat, I reached to kiss his cheek. He turned his head slightly, so my lips brushed his jaw instead. "Don't overdo it at the cafe," he mumbled. "You look knackered." I forced a smile. "Take care." He was out the door before I could say anything else. And just like that, I was alone. That evening at the cafe was unusually slow. Rain pelted the pavement outside as I wiped down the counter for the 3rd time. My colleague, Ellie, noticed my distracted air. "You all right, love?" she asked, pouring herself a tea. I hesitated, then admitted, "My husband's away. Conference. Feels odd." She gave a knowing smile. "Odd how?" I shrugged. "He's just distant lately. Snappy. And there's this name I saw on his phone. Alicia, with a heart." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Orange." I blinked. "Yes." She sighed, leaning on the counter. "I hate to say it, but that's never a good sign. My ex used those little emojis too. Turns out orange was their secret thing." My stomach twisted. Was I being paranoid? Or was I finally seeing things clearly? Back home, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty space where Callum's suitcase had been. A chill settled in my chest, heavier than exhaustion, colder than doubt. I reached for my phone, scrolled through our messages, looking for something warm, a joke, a compliment, even a kind word. There was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Just waited, heart pounding, for a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. It started with a notification. Friday evening, I was closing up the cafe. The last customer had just stepped out, and the rain was turning to sleet. As I reached for my coat, my phone buzzed. A message from Ellie. Just a photo. No text. Curious, I opened it. The breath caught in my throat. It was Callum, unmistakably him, sitting in what was very clearly not a conference room. He was in a bar, all low lighting and velvet booths, a cocktail in his hand. And next to him, smiling, leaning in too close, was a woman I'd never seen before. Her arm looped around his. My heart began to hammer. I typed furiously. "Where did you get this?" Ellie replied almost instantly. "My cousin works at the hotel in Manchester. She spotted him last night. Said he wasn't exactly shy about who he was with." I couldn't breathe. Back home, I collapsed on the sofa, the image still burning behind my eyes. I enlarged the photo again. Callum looked happy. More than happy. Relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. The woman, Alicia, I assumed, was beautiful. Confident. She wore a tailored coat and scarlet lipstick, and she looked at him like he was the center of the universe. I stared at the photo until my phone dimmed and the screen went black. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't say anything until he returned. I'd wait. I'd gather facts. But that resolve shattered when I checked his social media. A private post. Shared only to close friends. He hadn't realized I could still access his old account, the one he thought I didn't use. There it was. Another photo. Same night. This time, his arm around her waist. Her head on his shoulder. The caption read, "Finally living for myself." The world spun. My skin turned cold. And something inside me, something quiet and timid, snapped. He had lied. Brazenly. Carelessly. While I had ironed his shirts and kissed his cheek and wished him well, he had gone off to live for himself with someone else. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and began to plan. By the time Callum returned, the house would be different. I would be different. He just didn't know it yet. Callum arrived back on Sunday evening. The familiar sound of keys jingling in the lock made my stomach twist. I was in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I had barely blinked in the last 10 minutes. The moment the door creaked open, the air changed, thick with tension he hadn't yet noticed. "Hi, love," he called out casually, shaking rain from his coat. "Train was packed. Missed you." His voice was the same, but something about him wasn't. Maybe it was how light he sounded, how easily the lie slid off his tongue. I forced a smile. "Welcome back. Long journey. Bloody nightmare." He walked in, kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. I stood stiff as a board. He didn't seem to notice. "What's for dinner?" "Dinner. Not how are you?" "Not how's your week been?" "Just dinner." I watched him as he chatted about the conference. The endless meetings, the boring presentations. His voice never wavered. He had the audacity to act like he had actually been there. I knew every word was fiction. "Anything interesting happen while I was away?" he asked, mouth half full of the pasta I had cooked out of habit. I took a sip of water, buying time. "Nothing much." He nodded. "Thought so." I wanted to scream, to hurl the plate at the wall. But instead, I studied him, quietly cataloging the details. A faint lipstick mark on his collar. A new keychain from the hotel gift shop. And his phone, now always screen down. That night, as he slept beside me, I turned away and stared at the ceiling. He breathed deeply, content. I stayed wide awake, my body stiff, my mind racing. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed him to think everything was normal. I needed time. Because if he thought I didn't know, he'd let his guard down. And then I would have all the truth I needed, straight from him. In the morning, I kissed him goodbye, like always. And then I called Ellie. Ready when you are, I said. We had a plan to put in motion. Ellie met me at a cafe in Camden, tucked away behind the market, the kind of place no one would think to look for us. She wore sunglasses despite the overcast skies, and I had pulled my hood up. We looked more like spies than two women sharing a pot of Earl Grey. Right, she said, sliding her phone across the table. I've done some digging. I leaned in. On the screen was a photo of Callum. But not just him. He was standing outside a boutique hotel in Bath, arm around a tall brunette. She was laughing, her head thrown back, his hand dangerously low on her back. My mouth went dry. That was Friday night, Ellie said quietly. And this one's from Saturday morning, checkout time. A second photo. Same woman. Same hotel. Callum walking beside her, wheeling his suitcase. They looked like a couple on holiday, not two people sneaking around. I swallowed hard. She's the reason he was busy. Ellie nodded. Her name's Sienna. She works at the same firm. Recently divorced. And from what I can tell, she thinks Callum's single. The audacity burned. Did he really think I wouldn't find out? I whispered. No. He just didn't think you'd ever look. That stung, but it was true. Callum had grown so comfortable in his deception because I had trusted him blindly for 5 years. I let the routine soothe me, never once suspecting that while I folded his socks and made his dinner, he was booking romantic getaways with someone else. We need to be smart, I said, pushing the tea away. I don't want a confrontation. I want a revelation. Ellie grinned. You've got something in mind. I do. But I need to play the part first. Make him think everything's fine. Let him get comfortable again. She raised an eyebrow. You're going to act like nothing happened? Exactly. Because if he thinks I believe him, he'll keep slipping up. Dangerous game. Only if I lose. That night, I cooked his favorite chicken pie with buttery mash and even laughed at one of his stories. I sat close, touched his arm, kissed him goodnight. He was none the wiser. But every touch, every smile, was part of a performance. And soon, he'd be center stage with no way off. He thought I was the same trusting fiancé he left behind. He was wrong. The next 2 weeks were a delicate performance. I became the woman Callum thought he still controlled, doting, predictable, unaware. But behind every sweet smile was a growing fire. I was done being fooled. I was gathering the pieces. Callum's lies began to slip through the cracks. Little inconsistencies. One day he said he had lunch with just the lads, but his card statement, which I still had access to, showed a pricey meal for two at a restaurant known for romantic dates. Another time, he said he was at the gym, but his location history showed him in Notting Hill, a good half hour from his usual fitness club. I took screenshots. Every one of them. Ellie helped, as always, her eyes lighting up each time we found a new clue. It was like assembling a puzzle where the final image was Callum's true character, selfish, dishonest, cowardly. Then came the real break. It was a Saturday evening when he told me he had to head into the office for an emergency meeting. I nodded, even packed him a sandwich. He kissed my forehead, none the wiser. I followed him from a safe distance. I had Ellie's spare car and wore a cap low over my eyes. We drove south, past the river, nowhere near his office. Finally, he parked outside a townhouse in Dulwich. Neat, well kept. The kind of place a young professional might live. 10 minutes later, she answered the door. Sienna. Wearing a robe. She kissed him. I stayed long enough to watch him step inside, arms around her waist. The lights flickered on. Shadows moved past the window. I didn't cry. I drove back home in silence, parked outside the flat, and stared at the front door. For 5 years, I had imagined growing old with Callum. Now, all I saw was betrayal, repainted in every corner of our home. The next day, I baked lemon drizzle cake, his favorite, and smiled through our usual Sunday breakfast like nothing was amiss. He praised me for being so understanding lately, said he felt grateful to have someone like me. I nodded. Inside, I was miles away, already planning the end. There would be no shouting, no slamming of doors. Just the truth. and when it arrived, it would shatter him. The days that followed were unnervingly calm, like the hush before a thunderstorm. Callum continued his double life, oblivious to the fact that I was documenting every lie, every rendezvous, every false smile. His arrogance blinded him, and that was my advantage. I began moving my most important belongings to Ellie's flat. Old photo albums, keepsakes, some clothes, my journals. Nothing Callum would notice missing. Each night, he returned to our flat and kissed me like nothing had changed, while I smiled and nodded and served dinner like a dutiful partner. But my heart had gone cold. It was Thursday evening when I finally heard from Sienna. A message pinged through on my phone. An unknown number. It simply read, "You don't know me, but I think we need to talk. It's about Callum." I stared at the screen. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but anticipation. I replied, setting a meeting at a quiet cafe near Clapham Common, away from any place she or I might normally be recognized. When I walked into the cafe the next afternoon, she was already there, Sienna. Blonde, impeccably dressed, sipping a flat white with shaking fingers. She looked up when I approached, eyes widening slightly, as if she expected someone different. "You're her," she murmured. I sat down without smiling. "I am." For a moment, she was silent. Then she whispered, "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know he was still with you." She explained everything. How Callum had told her we'd broken up months ago. How he had painted me as unstable, clinging, bitter. How he swore he had no contact with me. It was sobering to hear the lies spoken aloud. She had found a receipt in his jacket for a dinner clearly meant for two, with a name she didn't recognize, mine. That had sparked her curiosity. A few online searches, and she had discovered the truth. My name. My face. The fact that we still lived together. "I ended it," she said. 2 nights ago. He begged me to forgive him. But I can't be part of that. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." As I left the cafe, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. There was no satisfaction in being right. Only clarity. I knew now that Callum didn't just lie. He rewrote reality. And I had been a supporting character in his twisted play for far too long. But the final act was mine. And the curtain was about to fall. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, fitting for what was to come. I stood by the window, staring out at the South London rooftops, steam curling from my tea. Inside, the flat was unnaturally silent. Callum was still asleep, his phone charging beside the bed, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I had everything I needed. Screenshots of messages, voice recordings, photos, the statement from Sienna. But more than that, I had my strength back. I no longer felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Callum emerged from the bedroom around 10, yawning and scratching his chest like it was just another lazy weekend. He kissed my cheek and asked about breakfast. "I thought we might go out," I said lightly, slipping on my coat. He looked surprised but agreed. We walked to a small cafe near Battersea Park. Familiar. Quiet. Perfect. As he tucked into his full English, I pulled out the envelope I had brought with me. "What's this?" he asked, mouth half full. "Proof," I said. He froze. "Of what?" "Everything." His fork clattered onto the plate. I watched as he opened the envelope and sifted through the contents. Photos of him and Sienna, screenshots of texts where he claimed I was crazy and long gone. Audio clips, including one of him laughing about how easy it was to fool me. His face turned a shade paler with each item. He tried to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't bother denying it," I said calmly. "She told me everything." He looked up sharply. "Sienna?" "Yes. She ended it. And now so do I." He stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee. A few heads turned. "You're overreacting," he hissed. I laughed, low and bitter. "You've been cheating on me for over a year, Callum. Lying every single day. I've been patient. Too patient. But I'm done." He looked around, desperate to maintain control, to manipulate the moment. But it was gone. I stood and placed a small card on the table. "My solicitor's details. I suggest you start packing." I want you out by next weekend. His mouth opened, but no words came. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the cold air biting at my cheeks. But I felt warm.
Alive. Free.
By the time I reached the park, I let out a deep breath. The curtain had fallen. But my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and a strange kind of peace settling over me. I had finally taken control. The world felt different somehow, less burdened, more open. My flat, once a place of resentment and heartache, was starting to feel like my home again. Callum had been surprisingly cooperative, though I knew it was only because he had no choice. He moved his things out without a scene, but I could see the guilt gnawing at him, a silent admission of the betrayal he had caused. I didn't care. It wasn't my problem anymore. One evening, I sat in the living room, sipping my wine as I flipped through a stack of magazines. My phone buzzed. It was Sienna. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello. Is it really over?" she asked, her voice soft. I could hear the uncertainty in her words, and I realized how much she had suffered too. Not just from Callum, but from her own choices. "It is," I said, my voice firm. "You can't keep living in the shadows, Sienna. You've got to face your own truth." "We all do." She was quiet for a while. Then, finally, she spoke again. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I replied, looking out the window at the setting sun. "But we can't change the past. We can only move forward." There was a long pause before she finally whispered, "Goodbye, Ellie." "Goodbye," I echoed, and I hung up, the weight of the conversation hanging heavy in the air. I sat back in my chair, taking in the stillness of the room. Everything felt different, lighter. It was as though the chains had broken, and I was free to live the life I deserved. The phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello. Ellie? It's Lila. You don't know me, but I was hoping we could meet." I frowned. "Lila? Who is this?" "I'm a friend of Callum's ex-girlfriend. We've been talking, and I think you deserve to know some things."
Can we meet?
A surge of curiosity hit me. I thought I had heard the last of Callum and his tangled web, but it seemed there was still more to unravel. "Where?" I asked. There was a pause. "Same cafe. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. The call ended before I could respond. The next day felt like it had stretched on for hours before the moment finally arrived. I walked into the cafe, the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods filling the air, but my mind was miles away. I had no idea what to expect from this meeting, and the uncertainty made my heart race. As I stepped inside, I spotted Lila immediately. She was sitting by the window, a cup of tea in front of her, her expression serious. She looked up when I approached, her eyes scanning my face, as if trying to gauge how much I already knew. "Ellie?" she asked, standing up. "Yes," I said, taking a seat across from her. "You said you had something to tell me?" Lila nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on her teacup. "I'm sorry to bring this up now, but I think you need to hear it. You deserve the truth, even if it's hard to hear." I leaned forward, trying to control the nervous energy swirling in my stomach. "What truth?" Lila hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Callum wasn't the man you thought he was. He was involved with someone else, someone from his past. But not just anyone. It was someone he was planning to marry before he met you." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't what I had expected at all. "What do you mean? He was going to marry someone else?"
Yes. Before you.
"Before everything," Lila explained. "I know you think I'm just some stranger, but Callum's ex-girlfriend, she's been in my life for a long time. I found out about all this a while ago, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. It's unfair for you to keep living with the lies." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. How could he have been planning to marry someone else? Had I truly been nothing more than a distraction? I tried to push back the wave of anger and betrayal flooding my chest. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you expect me to do with this information?" Lila's eyes softened, and she leaned forward, as if she understood the weight of what she was saying. I just want you to know the full story, Ellie. I've seen the hurt in your eyes, and I can't stand knowing you're still in the dark. I took a deep breath, the pieces slowly falling into place. The lies, the secrets, the betrayal, it was all starting to make sense. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. I could feel it. The last of my attachment to Callum was slipping away. I think I finally understand, I said, my voice steady now. And I'm done. It's time to let go. Of him. Of everything. Lila nodded. You're stronger than you know, Ellie. And you deserve so much better. I looked at her for a moment, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in my eyes. Thank you, I said quietly. As I stood up to leave, I felt a sense of closure, like the final chapter of a painful book had been written. It was over. It was finally over. I had no more ties to my past, no more lies, no more uncertainty. The world ahead of me was wide open, and I was ready to walk into it with my head held high. Outside, the city was bustling, but it felt different now. I was no longer walking with the weight of the past holding me back. The future was mine to create. And as I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in months, knowing that I had made the right decision. I was free.